What's up, everyone? Welcome to Back to the Future, the podcast that takes a trip down Philly sports memory lane and asks the question, what if? I'm your host, Jim Montgomery. You can follow me on Twitter at Jimbo_Mott. We're also now on TikTok at the same handle, Jimbo_Mott. I've been posting clips of what the podcast episodes have been about. I'm thinking I might do some just random live. I'm not even sure what you would call it, just like bonus content, I guess, just kind of discussing, maybe previewing some things, maybe do a little bit more current event type or current sports type things. So just be on the lookout for that if you're on TikTok, same handle, Jimbo_Mott. With the Phillies' current swoon and playing like absolute crap, we definitely will have some more baseball to come. Hopefully, not going down the rabbit hole of the chokes. But we do have a big, probably one of the biggest choking episodes ever in the history of sports, let alone Philly sports or Major League Baseball, coming up in the next couple weeks. But luckily for the Phillies, despite the fact they're playing like crap, the Brewers and the Padres are also playing like crap, so they're still pretty solid into that playoff position. I think as of recording time, they were up 2.5 games. They just got swept by the Giants, so wasn't a good weekend for the Phillies. But like I said, more baseball to come. Hopefully, it's not more negativity and bad things, but we shall see. But most importantly, football is back. NFL season opens up this week, and this time of year is always good for, I would say, fans of all teams and everybody for that matter, because everybody has hope. And I think as a sports fan, especially in Philly, where we tend to always end up with disappointment no matter what our expectations are for the team. I think having the hope and just the feeling that, you know what, it's a new season, things could get good, everybody's undefeated, even like the Texans, the Seahawks, the Jaguars, who are not expected to have good seasons, they're looking at some young players, hopefully getting some promising looks at them. But again, everybody just has that hope, and there's just like a buzz about it. The NFL, one thing they do well, and there's a lot of things, and I don't necessarily want to get into that. There's a lot of things they don't do well, but I think they do a good job of promoting their product. So they create that buzz about the opening of the season. They drag it out Thursday, and then you have the games on Sunday, and then the Monday Night Football. So I think they do, like I said, a good job creating that buzz. And it's very similar to the whole opening day in baseball. But again, it's different because I feel like the NFL season coincides with the end of summer, where baseball season, you're kind of looking forward to summer, getting out of school, where football, like school has either started or it starts this week. But again, it's just, there's something about it. It's just like a new beginning and just a fresh start. I mean, no matter how bad or what happened last year, there's definitely just the excitement about it. Whether you're a fantasy football fan, you're a sports gambler, your team is a Super Bowl favorite, which the Eagles are a sleeper, dark horse Super Bowl contender this year. So it's definitely, like I said, a lot of anticipation and nervous excitement, I think, going into this week as an NFL fan. And again, no matter who your team is, it could be, like I said, you could be one of the teams at the top, but even some of those mid-level and teams near the bottom of the rankings in the food chain, they're still looking to see what they have and if there's anything to build on for the future. So, like I said, everybody's undefeated right now, so there's that. And it's the only time in the year where everybody's going to be undefeated. But one of my, and I don't even want to call it favorite, because it definitely brings back a lot of bad memories. But one of the opening day stories for the NFL season that really is responsible for this podcast, which ultimately I should say, led to me wanting to write the book and kind of turned the tide of on what the book was. As I mentioned previously, the book was originally supposed to be all Philly sports. But as I was getting into the Eagles aspect of it, there's definitely a lot of therapeutic vibes to that. And it helped me kind of work through some things and didn't even realize, I guess, certain things and how they still impact me to this day. So one of those times, and I think this is also one of those episodes that I've had many conversations with many different people about this particular what if and what it means. And that's the opening day of the 1991 season when Randall Cunningham got his ACL was torn, and give you a glimpse inside kind of, I guess, how I run the podcast. I definitely I have the notes, but I kind of jot down some talking points and things like that. This one I'm not really going to do. I'm not sure where it's going to go. I'm not going to have many notes, just because like I said, there's a lot of emotion. There's definitely still some strong feelings, memories. Everything is very vivid. I mean, it's funny. I couldn't even tell you what I had for dinner the night before some nights, but the specific details and just the vividness of what I remember about this particular situation, it's there. So I'm definitely gonna not necessarily go on a riff, but if I kind of get sidetracked or go on a tangent, that would be why. So going into that 1991 season, I just remember the expectations for the Eagles were high, and part of that was just because of the natural progression of the team and things like that. They were coming off the 3 straight playoff appearances, starting with the Fog Bowl, then losing the next 2 games in the wild card round. That actually led to Buddy Ryan getting fired. And I just remember as the first time, because since I had been watching them as a kid and as a fan, Buddy Ryan was the coach. And as that 12-year-old kid, I did not understand why they would fire him. I mean, he just went to the playoffs 3 straight games. There were some question marks with the offense, but they did bring in Rich Kotite. More on him later. But Randall did have an almost MVP type season in 1990. In fact, I think by some media outlets he was the MVP in 1990. That was the ultimate weapon, Sports Illustrated cover. Like, there was just a lot. I think actually, I take that back. I don't know if that was the ultimate weapon or that was a couple years later. But either way, I just didn't understand it. And as a 43-year-old adult, I got to be honest, I still don't necessarily agree or understand what the thought process was, other than the owner at the time, Norman Braman, he was an idiot. And there's definitely going to be some episodes down the road regarding him and just and again, the NFL is a business. I get and understand that, but he was just in it for the money, and Buddy Ryan didn't get along with him. So I think there was definitely some of that played a role in Buddy getting fired. I was a kid, so I don't necessarily know, but I don't necessarily think there was a lot of calls for people to fire Buddy, because, I mean, people still, and I've talked about this on here, people love Buddy. I mean, Buddy didn't win anything in Philly, yet those teams, and Buddy Ryan in particular, everybody loves him in Philly. It's like that whole Philly mindset, the whole Philly vibe. And so I don't necessarily think people were like, I'm sure there were some, but I don't think there was just like a mass clamoring of, you need to get rid of Buddy. Buddy's got to go. Compare it sort of to like the Andy Reid vibe. I think everybody at that point, when Andy Reid got fired, I think everybody knew it was time. It had run its course. I don't know if the whole Buddy Ryan thing had run its course. Again, I have other episodes that I want to talk more about Buddy. But either way, Kotite as the offensive coordinator in 1990 did help Randall make some strides as a player. It didn't necessarily always mesh with what Randall wanted, but I think, again, he put up MVP type numbers. They did bring in Bud Carson, was the defensive coordinator, and at the time, I knew him as the head coach for the Browns at one point. Back, believe it or not, the Browns were one of the better teams in the AFC. But I remember him being the coach of the Browns, and I guess he got fired. But this is pre Alexa, pre Google, so like I had to actually really research and know more about him, and come to find out, he was the defensive coordinator of those Steel Curtain Steelers teams in the '70s. So as far as the football aspect of it, I think the expectations were high. I think the everybody thought the Eagles were a legitimate Super Bowl contender, with everybody being a year more mature, and maybe the whole stench of the Buddy Ryan playoff failures would go away. So, like I said, I think there definitely was some, at least from my perspective, there was a lot of excitement and a lot of just looking forward to this season to get started. And as that season was getting started, for me personally, it definitely was much needed. And I guess in the grand scheme of things, it really wasn't that bad. But as a 12-year-old, a lot had happened in that year of 1991. My grandfather died during the preseason of the Eagles, but I remember talking to him throughout that summer just about the Eagles and how there was just super expectations. He is part, and I have this in the book. Once I print it, you'll be able to see it. But him and my grandmother are part of why I became such a huge football fan. For those of you who are old enough, Miller Lite used to have, they were little football handbooks that they would put in their 30 packs or 24 packs. I forget what they were at the time, but they would always collect them and give them. And basically, it was just like a little preview magazine that they gave out for free. But there's a spot to keep all of the scores. And I just remember, like, the greatest thing ever was trying to catch them, like, in between the 1 and the 4 o'clock games, writing the scores down, or looking through the paper the next day and filling out the book. So you had sort of like just a diary of that NFL season. And but it, just from like talking with him, like that's part of why I became such a huge NFL fan, and specifically the Eagles. And like I said, just kind of in his last days, those last months and weeks, just talking about the Eagles and just like my little league season that year, and just so many like mixed emotions for that, because it was great to be able to spend some time with him there near the end. Luckily, I was old enough that I still have some of those memories, and it's pretty cool to have that to hang on to. Where I guess some of my other cousins don't necessarily, because they were younger or for whatever reason, don't have the same memories. But like I just remember that it's very vivid, just the high expectation for that season, and talking with him about that. I mean, ironically enough, I was at one of the preseason games the night before I found out he passed away, or the night before he passed away. So I think, to me, like, that season, like, that is my grandfather's season. And then on top of that, I went through my the school district redistrict the boundary lines. So I went through elementary and sixth grade with all of the same teams, and or not same teams, same people. And then all of a sudden, your formative years, I had to go to a new school in seventh grade and just meet a whole bunch of new people. So needless to say, I was ready for football to start. It was Labor Day weekend. The season started a little bit earlier back then, so I was ready to start. And definitely, I remember vividly going through my normal pre-Sunday routine, where I would read the Philadelphia Inquirer, always after my dad. So there was always a lot of, my dad is a folder and a messing up the paper. And I'm sure everybody knows there's two different kinds of paper readers: the ones that completely mess it up and the ones that are nice and neat. I am a nice and neat one, so it would always take me 10 minutes to put the paper back together after he messed it up. But I mean, listen, I was 12, so you gotta do those things sometimes. And then I watched WWE or WWF Superstars, or whatever the show was on the weekend mornings, and then it got into the pregame show. So it kind of was like my ritual and my routine. So I just remember being super excited, kind of like looking forward to it because of just all of the mental stuff I was going through. And again, it's not super like things where it's like, oh my goodness, but for a 12-year-old going to a new school, losing your grandfather definitely is, I don't want to say traumatic because I don't think that's the right word, but I mean, it definitely makes you kind of just like, wow, like a lot of craziness is going on right now. But that's, like I said, had football and that Eagles season to look forward to. So game comes on, and definitely off to like a slow start. I think it was 3-0 at the end of the first quarter, but the defense was playing lights out, like we all expected them to do. Then first play of the second quarter, Bryce Paup right up the middle, boom, went low, tore Randall's ACL. And I just remember thinking, like, oh my God, like this, it's not that bad. He's on the sideline, everything's good. And then they showed him being carted off, and he just had this disgusted look on his face. And I think you kind of knew. And I guess they scheduled an MRI or whatever for that Monday, but ultimately everybody knew. They're like, all right, he's done for the season. But Jim McMahon was the backup, and he came in. Slow start because I guess he hadn't been playing that much in a while, but they still won the game. Defense was absolutely insane. I think they had like 3 or 4 turnovers. I mean, the Packers weren't that good back then, but he still won. And I think we're like, okay, Jim McMahon, he won a Super Bowl before with a team that had a great defense with the Bears in '85. And that whole formula had worked before with Jim McMahon. So we all knew our defense was good. So we just figured, hey, let's see what can happen. Unfortunately, Jim McMahon could not stay healthy. The Eagles, other than Jim McMahon, rolled out Jeff Kemp, Pat Ryan, and Brad Gable that year. Not necessarily guys that are going to be wearing the gold jackets in Canton anytime soon. But hey, that's what we had. That defense, though, was arguably and in my opinion, the greatest defense ever. I don't care, 85 Bears, nope. I forget what year, but the Ravens when they won in I think like 2000. I would still take that Eagles defense. The only difference between those two teams is the Eagles defense didn't win the Super Bowl. They were the team that was like the first, like they led the league in the least amount of yards, passing and running, kind of all three together. They were fifth in turnover, or they were number one in turnovers, fifth in points. Like it was a legit like elite defense. And I think what happened is they came into their own under Bud Carson, and Buddy Ryan was more aggressive, and I don't know how much discipline he instilled in them, only because I remember a lot of times where they would get burnt deep. Like he would just blitz. And if your cornerback slipped or whatever, you got burnt deep. Isaiah Jenkins, his nickname was Toast. So, but I think a combination of Bud Carson coming in with a different mentality helped them get some discipline, which again was not always the case under Buddy. I think those players also were coming into their prime as players. I think that a lot of them were like their third, fourth, fifth year in the league, which typically they understand what the game's about, the speed of the game. So I think it was just a combination of everything. Plus, and this is where I go back and forth, I think they were going to be great, and there definitely was a lot of pressure on them to play well because the offense was just so bad. And some people say, oh, well, if the offense wasn't as bad, maybe they wouldn't have been wouldn't have been as good. I think the opposite. I think if they didn't have the pressure of knowing that they had to keep the team in the game because the offense was so bad, I think they could have been even better. Yeah, think about that. They could have been even better. And with the schedule and everything, they were 9-5 behind that defense going into the last 2 games of the season. And unfortunately, they lost. I think they lost to the Cowboys, which officially knocked them out of the playoffs. and then I think they beat the Washington's team. It was a meaningless game, but couple games stick out, and I think that the Browns game where they were down 23-0 and came back and won that game. Part of it is because it was a memorable game. Not too often do you see a team come back from 23-0. But it was one of the times that year that we were all together as a family, and I just remember watching at my grandmother's house, and just I don't know why that particular game. I think it was maybe closer to Christmas, and we always got together a little bit before. It could have been around Thanksgiving, somewhere around there. But it was nice for everybody to be together, and then on top of that, watching the game and as a family, and just the memorableness of that game when they came back. The other is probably one of the most famous games in that era, and that was the House of Pain game when they went down to the Astrodome, beat the Oilers, gave up 6 points to Warren Moon's run and shoot offense. And I think it was Jerome Brown was like, because they called it the House of Pain, the Astrodome, where because it got loud, the teams just like their offense was just lights out. They would just run teams out of the building. And I think it was Jerome Brown said, well, they brought the house, we brought the pain. And I think it was like a Monday night game too. It was like one of the like hardest hitting, like just, you wouldn't see too many games like that today because of how hard hitting it was. But it was one of my favorite games and one of the more memorable ones of that year. So ultimately that year they ended up 10-6, which you don't see too often. You don't see too many teams, especially back then. Now it's a little bit more common, but not too often do you see a team that's 10-6 and not make the playoffs. Not that they necessarily deserved offensively to be in the playoffs, but I mean, you would have liked to have seen that defense get in the playoffs when things sort of tighten up a little bit. I think if the quarterbacks could have managed the game, I think it could have been something special with that. So all of that to say, the what if here is pretty obvious. What if Randall had stayed healthy that year? What if Bryce Paup did not hit him? And I don't know if it was a questionable call. It was a low hit, but I don't think there was no like malicious intent to it. Randall blames Kotite. And I think he famously said they wanted me to be something I'm not. And then he would wear the "I'll be back scrambling" hats and "let me be me" and just all of those things. And I think part of it was Buddy Ryan had let him get away with doing whatever he want. And Buddy Ryan would say, go out and make 5 plays. Our defense will win the game. And I think Kotite brought more structure. And I think from being left alone to do whatever he wanted and just run around and make plays, I think it was definitely, there was some butting of heads there. And I think Kotite could have been and should have been a little more flexible with how he handled it. But I also think if Randall was 10 years later, or 10 years older, he definitely probably would have been more ready to maybe hear some of the coaching, because later in his career, he did have a resurrection when he went to Minnesota, and he chalked it up to coaching. So I definitely think there's an equal amount of blame to go there. But I mean, I think you have this guy that is a phenomenal athlete. He was what the quarterbacks are today before it was cool to be that. And I think everybody wanted to compare him to like Joe Montana and Bernie Kosar and those quarterbacks who just stood there and threw the ball and didn't run and make plays. And I think that is what I think stifled him and made some of that not work out. But anyway, so if Randall stayed healthy, what would have happened? And honestly, they would have been no worse than 12-4 that year. That's how good that defense was. And like I said, I think they would have been better without the pressure of having to keep those teams in the game, because they would have been freer to just go out and do their thing. And I think as that team started to grow and gel that year, I think what happened was they were feeling it. And I think without that pressure of having to keep the team in the game, I think they would have been fine. They could have gone 13-3, which is probably more realistic. I mean, think about it. They went 10-6 with a putrid offense, like like historically bad. It's very easy to me that two or three of those games could have gone the other way because many of them were under like 10 points. So it's not like they were getting blown out of every single one of their losses. There were a couple blowouts, but they were losing by like 7 points, 10 points, which you think a healthy Randall with that defense, at least two, probably three of those games go to the other way, possibly even four. I mean, I don't think 14-2 was out of the question either. The problem they would have run into that year was that Washington team, who eventually went on to win the Super Bowl, which I never realized it growing up and when I was living it, but there's a lot of people that will say that was the greatest Super Bowl winning team ever. So they were good. They went 14-2, but either way, the Eagles would have been the top wild card or could have edged out Washington for the division with a healthy Randall. And again, like it's not a horrible defense or a horrible offense or a bad, like absolutely putrid. Like they were historically bad. I think they averaged like a touchdown per game in October. Like it was crazy. I think they go to the Super Bowl. I think all of the frustration of Buddy Ryan's losses, I think once they would have gotten that first playoff win, because there was no way they were losing to like Detroit or the Cowboys or I don't even know who else was there. The Saints were pretty good. That like I don't think they were losing to any of those teams. I think their biggest competition would have been the Washington that year. So even if they had to go down to RFK, I think once they would have gotten that momentum, I think just that team, that defense, because they never wanted Buddy Ryan fired either. So I think they would have used that as motivation. I think it's I just think like whatever they would have done to that Washington offense would not have been good. I think they would have come down there, and granted, it would have worked both ways because their defense was good too. I don't see it being a high scoring game, but I see it as being one of those games where the defense keeps them in it, the offense struggles, but kick a couple field goals or whatever it would be. But I see them late in the game, like kicking a field goal or scoring a touchdown to go up by 10 or something. I just don't see that I don't see them losing. And then they go on to Super Bowl 26, which would have been the ultimate, what do they say? The immovable force and the unstoppable object. It was a wrestling thing, but Gorilla Monsoon, and I can't think of what the saying was. But either way, you would have had Buffalo, who was the league's top offense and a pretty darn good one back then. And they led the league in yards. They were like high up in points, and they could run the ball and pass the ball versus the best defense. It would have been awesome to see. Obviously, this is a homer pick, but I don't see them losing. I think that defense would have just turned it up another notch, get them into the playoffs, and I think they would have won the Super Bowl that year. And do they go back the next year? I don't know. The competition would have been the Cowboys because the Washington's team kind of fell off. You still had San Francisco that was good. The Packers were starting to get good. So it is conceivable that they could have made another run at the Super Bowl. But Jerome Brown died. And I don't think there's anything with this what if that would change that, unfortunately. And I think that is what changed the entire complexion and the basically the whole trajectory of this team, because everything just came to a crashing halt. And I think I mentioned this story. I know I mentioned meeting Reggie White with my friend at the University of Delaware, but like I'll never forget this. And this is where I said like some of these memories and some of these things are just so vivid. I remember walking across that stage and talking to Jerome Brown and asking him what he thought. We were still polite. We called him Mr. Brown, and him saying, with a healthy number 12 and this defense playing the way we are, nobody's beating us. Like he flat out said, nobody's beating them. So if excuse me, if that's what he felt with a healthy Randall coming back the next year in '92, just imagine what they could have done in '91 if he didn't get hurt. And unfortunately, that all came to a halt, and everything changed the day he died. And I don't think that whole era of Eagles football was different after that. But if they win the Super Bowl, maybe Reggie stays. Maybe he doesn't leave to go to Green Bay. I don't know if Bremen would have still paid him the money or paid him a contract. I mean, the guy was a douchebag. He was cheap. Ultimately, I think the players do eventually leave. Maybe Randall doesn't retire. Maybe he stays his whole career. I think he doesn't get hurt that year and they go to the Super Bowl. And even if they don't win, he's I don't think it's a question. He's a Hall of Famer. Right now, he's that borderline. I think he should get in. Not so much. I mean, his numbers were good, but I think as a game changer, I think eventually he will get in. And I feel like I said at one point, I'm never like you'll hear me talking up McNabb and supporting McNabb, and here comes another McNabb bust. I think numbers wise, McNabb is the greatest quarterback in Eagles history. I feel Randall should be in the Hall of Fame over Donovan, and I think because of the way he revolutionized and changed the game. So there's that. If Randall doesn't get hurt, maybe Kotite doesn't actually suck as bad as he does. Maybe he gets a little bit of credibility, and because they win the Super Bowl, maybe him and Randall get along, and they end up the next Walsh in Montana. Who knows? But ultimately, I think what happened is Bremen was still cheap. I think the players are still going to leave. The whole league changed with free agency anyway. So I definitely see this sort of as being like if they would have won, like that was the end of it. Like that was their last chance really to do it. They could have come back in 92 right before free agency because Reggie left after that season. But then Jerome died. There's just too many variables then. So 91 was the time, and it's still it's still painful to this day. I mean, I think Bremen would have eventually sold the team to Jeffrey Lurie anyway. But again, that to me, that's painful. I mean, the Fog Bowl is more disappointing to me, and those are like my two benchmarks of Eagles what is. But the Fog Bowl is still more. And again, it's probably because I'm so grew up and I have such an affinity for those teams. But I think the Fog Bowl is more disappointing, where that 91 team is painful, not only because that was the year and because of how it happened, but just all of the things I was going through. I mean, going through puberty, kind of growing up that way anyway, having to deal with my grandfather and then going to a new school on top of that, and then trying to navigate my way through that and sports and all of that thing, and just had a ton of shit going on. And that to me, it's just like I was looking so forward to that game and that season, and to have it just ripped away in the first play of the second quarter, it still stings me because I that was the year. Ultimately, I ended up adjusting well. Some of my good friends to this day I met at the new school, who I'm still in contact today, did well at football, played basketball and baseball at school. So it definitely adjusted well. Still miss my grandfather to this day, and it's been probably 30 some years at this point, but definitely enjoy having those memories and just thank him and my grandmother, God rest both of their souls, that they introduced me and were responsible for me becoming such a huge NFL fan. So I definitely love them for that. I mean, among other things too, but I love them for that and just helping create that passion in me. And like to me, this is just the biggest lost opportunity in Eagles history because of what the expectations were, the way the league played out that year. It just was all basically there. And if he had just stayed healthy, they would have beaten Washington. And I think once they got to the Super Bowl, at that point, if you were an NFC team, they were just dominating the AFC teams. So plus you had Buffalo, who they were going to, I guess it was their second straight of four straight losses. So we'll see. But like I said, the Fog Bowl was more disappointing. This 91 Randall team, that was more disappointing than anything, and a bigger loss opportunity than anything during the Andy Reid era. Maybe I'm just too attached. Let me know what you think. Maybe I'm attaching too many of my emotions there. Let me know. Would they had won the Super Bowl if Randall didn't get hurt? Am I just making it up? Could they, where they had no shot against Washington? Let me know. As I always say, like and subscribe. It helps the algorithm out. One of these days I'll figure out what that means. But leave me a comment. Send me a text message. Remember, Twitter, Jimbo_Mott. We're on TikTok now, Jimbo_Mott. Again, we have some hopefully good baseball things coming up to talk about. Hopefully the Eagles get off to a good start this year. Got some NBA stuff coming right around the corner. I'm working on some hockey things, but as always, until next time, I'll see you when I see you.